the most professional introduction I've gotten ever. So, thank you very much. Hope you can hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah, all right. I get the best slot of the day, right? Me and the 5 other presenters right after lunch. So, I'll try to keep it exciting. So my name is Dan Anderson. I'm with Wiz. I've been with Wiz for 2.5 years. I've been in the virtualization, cloud computing, and cybersecurity space for pretty much 25 years or more. And I'm pleased to actually be able to present my session. There we go. All right, so here we go. Go back. Democratizing Cloud Security. I'm going to talk about really CNAPP in general. I'm not going to really talk about Wiz. This is really about talking about CNAPP and the next generation tool sets that provide visibility and governance. And some of the things you should actually look for. And so in this particular case, we're going to start off with a discussion about really how a cloud attack actually unfolds. And really, I'm not going to go into super technical detail about this, but I want to walk through the timeline of an actual event that occurred at a customer's environment. I know it's an eye chart. I'm not going to go into real depth. I'm going to keep it kind of high level. But what I want you to understand is that this is a standard cloud environment. There's nothing particularly special about it. A couple of subscriptions being whether it's an account, sub-accounts, could be one provider, could be multiple providers. But in this particular case, it's a single provider. We have multiple VPCs, 2 separate subscriptions, and then of course we have this EC2 instance which is running Apache. Now this is a real occurrence. Their names have been removed to protect the innocent, so to speak. But the machine had multiple risk factors. When we go back and we look at the actual investigation, it had several critical and high issues being a collective of individual problems or findings that were on there, which made up of configuration findings, critical and high vulnerabilities, unpatched OS, running end-of-life technology, limited network exposure. There were clear text SSH keys, clear text domain certificates, and it had critical or high severity malware instantiated on it. Now, one of the things that we talk about, like attackers are out there constantly looking at our customers in your environments, my environment. I don't know anybody who has a home network. If you ever looked at your log files, right? I looked at mine the other day, right? I've gotten attacks from all over the world, and I'm nobody. Like literally my network is nobody, right? And so the odds are pretty good that a lot of them are just literally machine bots going out and hitting these ports. Matter of fact, the bad guys are using bots too, right? Now, what they're doing is they're scanning your environment, my environment, and everybody's customers' environments for open ports, looking for IP addresses that have open ports that are responding to activity. And so the funny thing is they don't have to do that anymore, right? There's a website they can go to reference all of the actual open ports on probably your network or your customers' networks or whoever you happen to be dealing with, where they can find out all of the technologies that are exposed, and they can actually take advantage of those if there's something going on with those particular technologies. And so this was already identified. This critical exposure was identified and detected on Shodan. It was actually presented out. So let's start with the timeline, okay, because that's really important. The timeline starts at 3:12, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The attacker knows what he wants to do. He's going to run a reverse shell, and he ends up getting into the environment and deploys the dirty cow malware. Right? Now, once he's in here, he starts doing a lot of things. He starts crawling around looking for things like secrets that will allow him to do other things within the environment. So he's kind of cataloging what's going on in the environment. He finds what he needs. He gets in. He sees buckets he can't get into. He sees users he can't get into. Finally, he finds a key that allows him to actually create a user, which allows him to now have a controlled user within the environment. Okay. And he also does some other nefarious things like deploying that malware. At 8:39 Eastern Daylight Time, there was a medium guard duty alert from the actual cloud provider that actually said, hey, there's something going on here. Now, how many of you know what happens to a medium alert inside of a SOC? Right? Pretty much nothing. Right? This customer actually had in anything that is medium to low is next business day. Right? So that has to be at least looked at next business day. Most companies don't even pay attention to medium alerts, right? It's criticals and highs, and then highs are the ones that get next business day. Criticals are the ones that get immediate attention. So he's in there messing around. Now he's going to start looking at all the other EC2 instances out there because he has a user that allows him to crawl through the environment, right? So now he's bouncing around. He's looking at all the things. He's looking for the actual RDS database, which is essentially the crown jewels, has all the information he wants. He knows it's blocked in certain areas. And then finally he figures out that he can find a secure area where he can get into it. And at 4:45 a.m., which is roughly 6 hours, which is an eternity, by the way, 6 hours later, doesn't seem like a long time, does it? But it's 6 hours later, he's actually in the environment, and he's actually going into the RDS, and he's exfilled all the data that he needs. Now, I bypassed a lot of little details, but the fact of the matter is the timeline was 0 to 6 hours, okay? Right? At 8:22 a.m. that morning, the incident response team, this is based on the actual war room kind of documentation that happened, right? I'll read it to you. It's unclear which RDS PostgreSQL user was used to access the database once the security group was open to the world, right? Because they've analyzed the attacker's methods, rotate keys, blast radius, etc. The second line in this, number 8, we would like to delete or change passwords on all RDS PostgreSQL users, but NRS is unable to do this at this time for various reasons, okay? And 9, this is the one that's the most disturbing. We are concerned that there is an additional backdoor / command and control in another EC2 instance that we did not find. Right? So not just concerned. When somebody uses the word concern in an official document, that's basically saying we know that this has occurred, okay? So the bottom line is, look, critical exposures, right, leading to lateral movement essentially is game over, right? And I wanted to talk about that because, and I lead off with this when I do this presentation because I think it's poignant to understand the timeline of events, how fast this actually occurs, and how little effort it actually took. Right? First of all, how little effort it took to find the fact that there was an area that could be attacked, right? Shodan, the fact that the bots are out there scanning, go look at your own network. I literally, every time I come out to these events, I look the week before, see what's going on, catalog what's going on. I got hit by China, I got hit by North Korea, I got hit by numerous places in ex-Eastern Bloc countries, state actors, right, nation-state actors, private actors, and as I said, my network is nothing. My network is a blip compared to everywhere else, right? So, we all remember this, log4shell, right? And the reason why I'm going to tie this into it is like, when you want to know something like, where is log4j in my environment, right? It's not a simple question because there's so many ways that we run software in the cloud, whether it's containers, serverless, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service across multiple clouds, right? And so that question of understanding, do I have a risk? Am I at risk for the log4shell it's not as easy as you would think, right? Vulnerabilities assessment, container security, Kubernetes, external exposure, cloud entitlements, all of these things come together where you have simple questions, but no simple answers because the environments are complex. The situation is complex, right? Simple questions like, am I at risk from this particular problem? And you could sit there and enter whatever malicious thing you're talking about at that point, right? In this case, we're talking about log4shell. Do I have databases exposed? Are keys and secrets stored securely? Do I have roles being provisioned with the right size permissions, right? All of these things in the cloud are interrelated. Public web applications protected by a firewall. Right? And in the cloud, it's even more complex because now I'm not just protecting what is considered to be production. Right? I have my entire CI/CD pipeline essentially exposed because you have to develop it where you're actually going to build it. Right? So you have an entire suite of things going on there. So what we found is that back in the day, right? We talk about back in the day. We were talking like a couple of years ago. So two things. We refer to two things. I refer to things legacy software, right? Software that was originally used in a data center or in an on-prem situation that we've tried to make work in the cloud spaces, right? We know that's fundamentally flawed for various reasons, whether they have agents, whether they have sidecars, right? It's problematic getting them deployed, and it's almost impossible to get 100% coverage, right? The other thing we talk about is these Generation 1 tool sets, right? And there's nothing wrong with them other than the fact that they don't talk to each other, right? And then the solutions for security products that don't talk to each other, can anybody tell me what that would be? I can tell you what the industry response is. Let's drop it into a SIM. We'll create a whole bunch of queries to try to figure out whether what we're getting for telemetry matters, right? And we know that that doesn't work because I ended up going from 200 to 300,000 individual pieces of information to now having very customized 20,000 worth of queries, giving me separate responses for what I'm actually looking for. Right? And so foundationally, we're operating with these tool sets. And again, I call them legacy or generation 1. Right? And so the key word in this that I want you to kind of think about, and when we think about other products, not just governance or any of the other cloud security platforms, is platform. Right? It has to be a platform. And so Gartner called it this, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. I'm not entirely convinced that there's a lot of traction going on with the CNAPP space, right? As far as the uptick of anybody even understanding what CNAPP is. How many of you have ever heard of CNAPP before you came into this room? Well, that's pretty good, because the last time I did this, well, 2 hands went up and there were 50 other people going, I'm not sure what it is. It's another acronym, right? So, and there's alphabet soup up there, right? These are all those Gen 1 things. So what Gartner is saying is, look, we got to have a singularized platform that really ties these things together and takes all of these individual components, puts them underneath the single platform, but allows them to report up from a perspective of context or with relationships to each other, right? Having CSPM, or I can search for vulnerabilities. Who remembers this? And it's still happening today because we all know it. The poor guy that was basically MBO'd on walking around with a spreadsheet with vulnerabilities in it and going and talking to every organization that had something on that spreadsheet and saying, I need to eliminate this vulnerability off the spreadsheet. Do we have a problem? And how can I get this off of this list, right? And we know how successful that was on-prem, right? And we know that that was not successful on-prem. And in the cloud, it makes it even worse, because what makes a vulnerability, right? Just because I have a virtual machine sitting there with, let's say, a 9.8 CVSS score, doesn't mean it's actually a vulnerability that I should care about. Should I care that it's there? Probably. But in the scheme of things, how does it compare with everything else that I need to look at? Now, you take that single VM, not connected to anything, with that CVSS score, 9.8 vulnerability on it, and you contrast it to, say, let's say a Kubernetes cluster, right, that's running, something that has multiple vulnerabilities on it, same level score, but it also has things like exposed secrets. It has things like misconfigurations. It has malware, right? It's exposed to the internet, right? It's got excessive permissions, all of these things. You compare and contrast those two together, and all of a sudden I now have a better idea that this guy over here is much more vulnerable or much more risky, and I need to solve that problem, right? And so that's the whole premise under the CNAPP, or Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, is to take these individual tool sets, whether they're, again, Gen 1, whether they're originally legacy tool sets, combine them under one platform and allow them to actually give you better visibility across the board. Now, the other thing that it does is it takes this idea of no longer is cloud security, or any kind of security of that matter, but specifically cloud security, an individual sport. It's a team sport. It has to be, right? You have to understand that the tool sets that you're buying now absolutely have to be able to address multiple organizations and multiple teams within a single company. If they've got anything to do with cloud, they're going to need to be leveraging the same tools that the security practitioners are using, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. It has to be accurate, right? Again, high fidelity, because now we're involving more people who are less tolerant to fluff, right? The idea of a security team passing something off over to a development community that has low fidelity and may not matter will literally get ignored after the second or third time it occurs, right? Which immediately takes and diminishes your capabilities as a security team to answer these problems. It has to be able to be fast, and it has to be able to scale sideways, upwards, and downwards, okay? It has to be able to move with the actual speed of the cloud. And it has to be able to empower people that are in the environment to actually be able to solve problems by themselves, not just rely on somebody else, okay? And that's kind of the tenets of what a CNAPP environment is. Again, I want to focus on the idea of platform, not necessarily the rest of the terminology there. But I was talking about like this being a teamwork thing. It's a partnership. It has to be. So you have the guys that are out there constantly looking, the maintainers, right? They're monitoring, they're maintaining, they're looking for it. Now let's frame this in the idea of log4shell again, right? They're going to identify those vulnerable log4shell libraries. They're going to enable the teams to fix them, and they're going to track it over time, keeping track of what's going on and what's being fixed, right? Those are the day-to-day guys that are always looking, right? Then you have the defenders, right? They're actively looking for who's trying to exploit these problems from log4shell or log4j in my environment, right? Think the incident responders, think the SOC, the NOC, right? Those guys, the threat hunters, et cetera. And then you have the builders, right? The coders, right? They're out there building code, writing code, DevOps, developers, IT. They're the ones that are ultimately responsible for fixing the problem with the log4shell libraries. Without all three of these working together, this doesn't happen, right? This doesn't work. The old adage of security creating just kind of policies and saying, hey, this needs to be fixed, or identifying things that are problems, doesn't get it done, and it hasn't been getting it done, right? So these teams have to actually work together with each other. And so really, how do we actually accomplish this process? And again, let's call it, just change CNAPP into adopting a security platform into your environment, right? And specifically, I'm talking about cloud security, obviously because that's the genre that I'm coming from, right? But you can take these kind of, these templates and say, if I look for the right tooling, whether it's a CNAPP or any other security tool, and I understand these capabilities, I can use this kind of framework to adopt those across the environment as well, right? So first thing is visibility. Like I talk about three things that are required to be successful and understanding what is going on in your cloud environment. You need three things, really. You need visibility, okay? 100% unfettered, unquestioned visibility, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about the unfettered part as we talk about without bothering anyone, okay? The second thing is going to be clarity, right? Clarity is what and why. What is it I'm seeing and why is it there, right? Remember, security teams are not necessarily picking and choosing these technologies. It's being chosen by the DevOps community, right? They're building infrastructure now. And they're not consulting with anyone as to why they picked MongoDB versus MariaDB versus this, that, or the other thing. It's because it was something they worked with before. They thought it was cool. It's a new technology. It's something they just learned about, right? Remember the software review boards that we used to have when we were on-prem, right? I mean, that's not necessarily happening anymore, right? It's happening maybe post-fact when all of those pieces have been put together, and then there's a not-so-clear picture of what was built from a monolithic perspective, right? And then the third thing that I want you to remember is this idea of context, right? Context is, why do I need to care about this? What is its relationship to everything else within the environment that I need to understand, right? So visibility, clarity, context, and you tie it together with these. Step one, gain full visibility without bothering anyone. Step two, use context to prioritize, and I love the word ruthlessly. Right? So let's not give anybody bullshit stuff to go chase their tails with. Like, let's give them actionable things that matter that will move the needle. Right? That's that ruthless thing. And let's take the word developers, and let's just say cloud interests to be more proactive, right? Because it's, yes, definitely development, right, in this particular context. But it could be anybody. Let's make sure we're being proactive and allowing the teams to see what they need to see. So first one. Full visibility without bothering anyone. Without bothering anyone means, hey, I don't need to go to you hat in hand and say, please, sir, will you install my agent? Will you install my sidecar? We have to start with a low touch, no bothering, can I see things that I need to see, right? Which means we have to start with APIs. We cannot start with agents. Does that mean we don't get to agents at some point for additional telemetry? No. But it means we have to start with the lowest impact that we possibly can to our communities, or else they're not going to do it. If I had to have them instantiate an agent or a sidecar every time they built out a new VM or Kubernetes cluster, they're not going to do it. We know that, it's not because they're malicious. They have the same deadlines. They have the same assignments as like the other 14 development teams out there, right? And you know what they're being told is, we need to go to the cloud, and you're going to be the ones that get us here. And you can't have security sitting on the other side saying, you're not going to the cloud because you're not doing this right? Those two things are, right, they're at odds with each other. And so what happens is, all of a sudden, what the business wants gets forgotten. And the whole reason why they were going, and I don't care why. I don't care why they were going to the cloud. I don't, honestly, right? It doesn't matter if it was ROI, TCO, OpEx, CapEx, to save that money, if they believe that that's the case. Whatever that reason is, the business decided to go to the cloud. The development communities are the ones that are trying to get them there, and security is the ones that are responsible for protecting it after they get there. And none of them were talking to each other when this all was actually started, okay? So whatever we do has to be independent of the architecture that the business decides to move to, okay? I don't think the business is going to them and say, hey, do you want to do AWS or do you want to go Google? Matter of fact, I would be willing to bet the business didn't even specify. The business said, we need to do this thing. And the developer went, well, I know Google, so I'm going to start developing in Google. And then somebody came along and said, wait a minute, you should probably be thinking about AWS because they got these other tools. Okay, you know what? I'll do some development over here, but we'll run our production over here. Sound familiar? Now all of a sudden I got multi-cloud. Right? I got 2 cloud providers. And then somebody decided that they really wanted to do business in Asia. So they wanted to actually put it on Alibaba because they didn't want to put it on any other cloud. You see where I'm going with this? Right? And these are all decisions that are being made not necessarily by the security team, because I don't think they came into play at all until they were told they needed to secure it and protect the business. Yeah? Matter of fact, the business probably didn't even have part of those conversations. How many here have actually gone through some sort of integration with another software as a service where they call in a development community and they basically came in and they wrote something in the cloud to integrate with something on-prem that you had, and you didn't realize they were putting it in Azure or AWS until it was done? Right? That happens literally every day. All right? And of course, visibility is going to be best when independent. So how do I do these things? Well, I'm going to start with API scans, Kubernetes API scans, cloud API scans. I have to be able to look at the control plane from a cloud service, so looking at resource configurations. We also have to now look at the data planes, right? So cloud workloads themselves, such as VM snapshotting, runtime containers, container registry scanning, serverless functions. All of these things, right, can be done without any friction by going to somebody saying, I need to install something or I need to instantiate an agent. What was the number one request, do you suppose, when our founders came out and started going around for the first year when they were building out Wiz? What do you suppose the number one request was when we said, hey, what is it you want from a security platform? The number one request wasn't what they wanted, it was what they didn't want. Can you guess? It was agents, right? Because they're agent overload, right? And they dealt with it on-prem and they didn't want to just convert that into the cloud, right? So step 2, context, to prioritize ruthlessly. Anybody quickly loses trust in noisy and over-alerting tools, including the security team, right? But they're stuck with the tools that they have and they have to chase down these rabbit holes and they're not given that context. Well, security team needs context, but even more so when they're talking to the people that have to go in and look at these problems, that are developing these problems, they have to be able to have a reasonable conversation with them and have the evidence, not just, hey, I got this alert, right? We're already getting enough of that, right? So we already have our cloud environments that are giving us thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of alerts daily, weekly, monthly, depending on how big your environment is, right? And so for every alert, think about it, and for every alert, even if we called it out, let's say 100,000, even if I took out 80% of those, that's still 20,000 alerts that somebody has to go and individually look at to understand, unless context is given when the alert is made. Unless I can say, you know what, this thing here is this level of risk, and here's all the evidence that goes along with it, okay? Don't tolerate noise. If you can remove the noise, get rid of it, but don't send it to the builder. Don't send it to the guys that are going to literally lose faith in you the minute you start giving them something. Because remember, they're not operating on the same MBOs that you are, Mr. Security Team, right? Their performance is determined by how fast they get the customer into the cloud or build these applications or replace the actual legacy or monolithic on-prem applications, right? So we have to remember where they're coming from a different place. So you have to go to where they live. And you have to be able to talk to them where they live. So prioritizing what's critical is security's responsibility, but they have to be able to speak to it, okay? Risks in the clouds are complex, right? It matters. Workload context, what vulnerabilities, where is it in the inventory? Do we have exposed secrets? The cloud context itself, right? So resource configuration, networking, identities, right? And then finally, the business context. What is it? What environment is it? Who owns it? What's it doing? Okay? All these things come together, right, to help understand what I should be actually looking at. Prioritization and context, right? I have to have the context to understand. If I don't know, right, so do I care about a VM that's sitting there with a web server that basically doesn't serve anything up but web pages versus something that's running $15 billion a day in transactions through, right? That's a contextual question, but it's one that's very important as far as determining what I consider to be a risk and what I should focus on to solve in my problem environment, okay? And then finally, empower your developers, and again, change that word developers to cloud community. And what I mean by that is anybody has anything to do with cloud, right? And there's multiple organizations. It's not just security. It's, again, that we talked about, the responders, right? SOC, NOC, IR, risk guys, IT, right? Your finance people, yes, your finance people, your DevOps, you know, your DevSecOps, all of those teams. Anybody that has anything to do with cloud needs to have the ability to be proactive as it relates to things that they care about. Yeah? Okay. Now, developers even more so. Why? Because if I have a VM that they built from an image that has a problem, they're the ones that are going to fix that VM image. Right? Or they're going to work with the team that actually owns the image to fix the image to meet their needs. Right? But typically, they're the ones deploying it in the cloud, so they're the ones that are going to have to fix it. Whether it's a VM image, whether it's a serverless function, whether it's a Kubernetes pod or cluster, okay? That's that idea of shifting left, right? When you think shift left, don't think about it in like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh my God, shift left is such an overused term. I look at it in two ways. I need to know how to shift left in order to get to the person who created this function inside of the cloud space that I need to worry about, something that's broken. And I need to help them fix that problem, or at least even understand that there is a problem and how it's a problem, okay? And then there's shift left thing number two, which is create tool sets or give them tool sets to allow them to solve these problems proactively without actually even instantiating them to begin with, right? If they know how to proactively go in and maybe not deploy something that has exposed secrets or excessive permissions or misconfigurations or malware on it, if they can give them the tool sets to not do it, they're going to be more than happy to avoid the conversation of how that got out there by using those tools to begin with, okay? Right? And so that's the idea, right? Giving them the options to be able to do that, empower them to be able to create those things. And then, of course, this idea of it has to be, in order to check the box in security, look, we all know, right? Security, you've all seen this, right? This is my G.I. Joe, and I don't want anybody else playing with it, to use that little analogy, right? Security gets a tool. They automatically wrap the word security around it, and they say, you don't need to know. You don't need to see this thing. This is ours, and we want to share it, okay? Well, that has to be the first thing that goes out the window when we start talking about this. And the only way to effectively do that is to give them the comfort of knowing that they can actually, A, bucketize the things that people see into the need to know thing. So if I am development team A, working on initiative A, then I should only see what matters to me as a developer or things that I have purview over, right? And so we should create these things like projects or containers or domains of ownership, if you will, and then we should tie them to role-based access controls to allow us to make sure that we're giving them visibility into only what they need to see, which does two things. First thing it does is it assuages our security team to say, look, they're not seeing everything that they don't need to see. But it also does this interesting thing of eliminates white noise, right? Because if I can say to you, look, if I gave you all access to the same thing and you all got 150,000 alerts, right, you'd lose interest really, really fast. But if I gave you the stuff that only you cared about the alerts for, now all of a sudden we're talking, right? So it solves a couple of different problems there, right? And so that's how we need to do that. we have to humanize this conversation, and it's look, history details. There was anybody here that actually lived through the virtualization revolution? Right? Okay. Going from physical data center, hardware, to virtualization, I was there back in the early days. I did that. I watched that fight occur. Remember, the SAN people didn't talk to the networking people. The networking people didn't talk to the storage people. The storage people didn't talk to the operating system people. The only people that really got along were the Linux people and the storage people. And then you had the platform people, and then you had the software people. All of these people that we had to talk to as virtualization experts when we went into these. Remember, we had to do this. And the one outlier. Who was the one outlier that never got on board with virtualization? I talk about it like it's a part 2 of a bigger picture, right? Because here we are, the same problem. We still have the outlier, right? The outlier during that period was security. I eventually got all those other guys that I named to talk to each other, in spite of what security wanted to do, right? And anybody who was there, for the younger folks who weren't there during the early parts of the virtualization piece, it was a struggle, right? And by virtue of, guess who made the determination to go virtual? And I can guarantee you, I can tell you who it wasn't. It was the business that said, you know what? I'm tired of spending all this money on virtual. And now all of a sudden we're doing the same thing in the cloud. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all of that. But what happened back then was we didn't really humanize this whole thing, right? And so one of the things we learned from that is we have to humanize the security risk that we're talking about by saying, look, here's what happened. Here's why you should care. Most importantly, the number one thing I think that gets appreciated is here's the evidence. I'm not just saying there's an alert, you need to go take care of it. I'm telling you, here's the alert. Here's all the associated secrets. Here's all the associated players, all the individual pieces of information that you could ever want to understand about what this problem is, okay? And oh, by the way, here's how you solve the problem. It's not drop the ball, punt it over the fence and say, we told you, now go fix it, catch you later. It's, hey, look, here's the problem. Here's how you fix it. Here's how you remediate. Oh, by the way, not just this way, but I can do this way, multi-click, single-click, automation. I can do some AI stuff for you. Like, give them a library of canned actions that they can take. So you give them options, right? Let them choose, like, their own picture pages. Like, give them what they need. You got to give them the crayons and you got to give them the paper. Let them draw their own picture, okay? So that's how we talk about adopting a CNAPP across the cloud organization. And then we follow up with the idea that in security and in development, cloud is obviously the biggest transformation that we've seen forever. And I say that tongue-in-cheek. We said that when it was virtualization too, right? But we take all the problems of virtualization, on-prem or otherwise, we now push them up into the cloud, and then we start saying, look, we're going to develop thousands and thousands and thousands of technologies. We're going to probably release one every month, if not every 2 or 3 every month, that are new and better ways of doing things. And oh, by the way, don't forget that we're in the middle of transforming all of our monolithic on-prem apps, right, to stateless in the cloud apps, right? So a lot of things going on there, right? And so you have the new environments, which then creates this idea of new risks, right? So now all of a sudden I have a different attack vector. It used to be I just protect my production environment and everything else was sitting behind, physical and heavy firewalls and nobody could get to it except for people that were, now the whole thing's up there, okay? Am I over time? Would you give me like 3 extra minutes? Would you give me 5 minutes? Give me a whole extra 5 minutes? Look at you guys. Obviously, there's a new ownership model, right? But ultimately, it comes back to the business, right? And so now I've got my security teams and my development teams. They have to work together. They have to. Or nothing gets done for the business, okay? What's happened is because of things like the capacity of the security teams, right? Overwhelmed. They still have to deal with all the legacy problems that we gave them with on-prem data centers, but then we layered on all the stuff we did in the cloud, right? expanding cloud footprint, more technologies, growing cloud teams, rapid innovation. You notice that red line? That's all the cloud stuff that's going on. And what's happening on the blue side is a gap, right? The security teams can't keep up, right? We have to give them the tools and the telemetry to help them choose and pick the right stuff that's going to move the needle on securing their environment, okay? And that's what this is supposed to tell you. We just can't keep doing the same thing over and over. So, again, just to reemphasize, cloud security, team support, right? Security teams, central visibility and control, provide self-service to the development teams to actually go and solve the problems individually. And again, unconditional visibility, focus like a dev power, right? So again, 3 things I just want you to walk away from when you think about your next generation cloud tooling. Right? It has to provide these 3 things: visibility, clarity, and context, right? And it has to be a multi-user tool. It has to be something that everybody uses, right? Because this siloed approach is broken and it can't continue. Can't continue. I think that's pretty much all I have. The rest of this is kind of fluff, so I'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A if you have any questions. Yes, sir.
Just a quick one. So CNAPP, the way that you showed us has an umbrella, so many things underneath that. Where would something like SSPM, would that be part of like a SaaS security posture management? Would that also be sitting somewhere that can be covered by CNAPP?
So I think the first thing that we have to understand is that it starts, if you think about it starting from a governance perspective, right, we have to start somewhere. And so those individual components are probably going to be more governance related first. And it's going to be very cloud specific, Kubernetes on-prem, like cloud specific. But as far as like software as a service components, eventually I see these being folded in. Right now those are kind of sitting on the outside, like they're separate products, right? But you still, if I don't own the cloud environment, it's hard for me to actually determine, right, as a product. If I can't look at the actual API basis of the substrate, it's hard to actually for a product to understand what the actual risks are. So you have to have specific hooks into those software like Salesforce or like Office 365, right? In this particular case, yeah, right? CNAPP, and again, CNAPP is evolving, like, and just like the products that are being layered on top. There's some, if somebody came to me and said, hey, Dan, I'm looking for a CWPP product, right? Cloud Workload Protection Platform, I'm gonna be like, you're doing it wrong. Like you're thinking legacy, you're thinking Gen 1, right? I need to think more like from a platform perspective. Can I address those individual pieces? The bang I'm going to get for my buck is going to be the fact that it's a platform that takes those multiple technologies and ties them together. And we have to work with you to understand what is the most important subcomponents that you need to focus on and what you're going to get the most value out of. Right? But you have to start somewhere, and that's kind of where Gartner said, look, this is this thing, CNAPP, it's going to encompass these things. As an example, we've taken some other liberties with it, and we've injected other telemetry like DSPM. Right? Is that a core tenet of CNAPP? No, but it adds additional telemetry. What we want to do is we want to make sure that like the idea of what you need to make intelligent decisions are continuously added into the CNAPP platform. And at some point, if it makes sense to do, right, a specific targeted approach to like a software as a service, it may come to play. But right now, I would say that there are companies out there that are doing it better, and probably a better story is the integration of a CNAPP platform with those things, right? But if I don't understand all the individual components or can see them, then how can I actually put them on a graph and be able to tell you exactly what it is that's at risk, right? And yet, good question, thank you. I got to wrap up. One more, any more questions? Yes, sir.
So Microsoft has been using its monopoly to push their defender platform, right? So I've been having a hard time making the ecosystem look at any other solution because they're pushing the platform concept as well, right? Mm-hmm. So how would this differentiate itself from a CNAPP perspective versus defense?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that what the objective of, with all due respect to the Microsofts, all the other cloud providers in the world are, is that they're going to provide you tooling that what I call keeps butts in the seats, okay? they're addressing a need that you say, hey, if I'm an Azure guy, like, I'm gonna check these boxes. What a lot of them are not taking into account is the fact that these things are extra, like multi-cloud is literally a thing now, right? And yes, they are developing some tools, but they don't have the tooling that's actually gonna give you parity across all clouds. So you can look at those bigger pictures. Like 99% of my customers are multi-cloud. And the reason why I know that is because they go, are you in AWS? I'm in AWS. And I go, are you in Azure? And they go, kinda. Kinda's a yes, right? That's like saying, do you have another room you need to secure? Kinda. Like at a house. Do you have a basement? Yeah, but I don't really care about the basement. Really? Because that's something you need to be concerned about, right? And so, like, that's why I say 99% of my customers are multi-cloud. And by the way, it only takes one thing to be stored improperly in another cloud to basically blow the hatch on the whole smack, right? And that's the other problem with those cloud-native toolings, right? We integrate with all those cloud toolings, and CNAPP, or the platform itself, should have integrations there and use those as pieces of telemetry, but not rely solely on those pieces of telemetry, as in added into the additional telemetry to give you better, like the further amount of information I give you, right, the better decision-making capability you have, because now you have all the actual picture. That's that context thing that we talked about. So, but that's my answer, right? I mean, they're always going to tell you their tooling is better, but ultimately, you need to have something that isn't solely rely on. I always thought it funny. Nothing against my cloud service provider friends, but right, they are basically the fox watching the hen house, right? And they said this. We all know you brought a mutual responsibility, right? And security is a mutual responsibility. It's 10% theirs and 90% yours, right? It's a shared responsibility model, right? So give yourself the best fighting chance by making sure that you have something that can provide overwhelming telemetry, not just what they think you need to see. Yeah? I think my time is up. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming, and have a nice day.